All right. And we are live. This is Proof of Podcast, episode number 2. And we may or may not have a guest join us today. It was kind of a last minute deal. This is pretty important stuff and pretty urgent. So we want to talk about the regulation that has been introduced in the Nebraska Senate.
Emergency podcast, right?
Yes. So calling all Nebraskans, we want to bring your attention to this and raise awareness. And the hearings are next week, but then beyond that, we have a little more time to regroup and get our ducks in a row and get the word out and organize. But we want to get something out now, at least for these hearings, and hopefully have a good showing. I'm planning on being there, and I don't know, Kyle, were you planning on coming or not?
Yeah, so I will be there. And I think really, no matter if you're like for the bills or against the bills, as long as we have as many people as possible, I just want to have a voice there showing that our lawmakers should basically come to us, right, and try to start creating bills that we would like, and not just I don't even know where they got these laws from. So I would just like to open up that dialogue.
It's funny, they went from having really no idea about what cryptocurrency is to let's write a bill about cryptocurrency.
Right. Yep.
I've talked to some of them. They don't know really what it's used for or how it works.
Yep.
And so we're gonna try to compile some resources, get a centralized website up, and so people can know who to contact and how to contact them. And yeah, like Kyle just said, we want to make sure that they know that we're listening and we have a stake in the matter, and that we think it's important that this is treated properly. So. I know from the idea, also the part of the idea is with having Kyle and I and Trent. It looks like he's trying to get in here now. Trent dialogue is that hopefully having these conversations with Nebraska will be able to in the future, I suspect, the other states, South Dakota, North Dakota, Iowa, Colorado, and Kansas, Oklahoma, Missouri, those guys will all potentially have the same situation of bills that are up for consideration, and we want to kind of figure out some format, some template, some basic ground rules that can help them fight these same battles in their states as well. So that's what I really, even looking beyond Nebraska, I really want to help those other states as well at some point in the future. So
yeah, Trent, absolutely.
Trent, are you there?
I am. Can you hear me?
Oh, yes, we can. Welcome to Proof of Podcast.
Thanks. I'm not able to get my video to work for some reason.
That's okay.
We don't want to see you anyways. So.
Really? I dressed up.
Do you want us to call you Trent, or should we use some other pseudonym for you?
You can call me Trent.
All right.
Hey, Ed, you want to go through introductions and then give our sponsor plugs, I guess, and then kick off.
Thanks for reminding me. And I will allow Trent to choose how much he wants this. This is last minute, so I didn't really prep him much for it. But our sponsors. So Linkstream is a software development firm here in Omaha, and they were very instrumental in getting this going. And then also Jim Collison at Gallup also was very helpful in kicking off Proof of Podcast. So I want to give a shout out to both of those folks. And anybody else I'm not mentioning, Kyle?
I think that's it for now. So.
All right, Trent. Yeah, go ahead and tell us who you are if you want, and why we invited you, etc.
Sure. Trent Cooksley. I'm head of open innovation for Markel Corporation, which is a global property and casualty insurance company, and I focus in startup outreach and some strategic investments for us, and also. Personally have some interest in this space as an investor, an angel investor, and an investor in some companies, and an advisor specific into the crypto asset blockchain space. So I get across a personal interest with some business work because at Markel, we're also interested in how we can utilize the technology to enhance our business and customer relationships. So I'm pretty involved in the space, and I have an extreme interest in seeing it be successful, and being based in Omaha, the local community is important to me as well.
Have you had a chance to go through both the bills at least once, I guess?
I have had a chance to go through at least once, but
Okay.
I am by no means an expert in what they're trying to accomplish.
Sure. Yeah. Nothing we're saying today is legal advice to anybody. This is not, we are not lawyers. So to give can we agree as a group that we don't like Carol Blood's bill at all? I mean, can you, Kyle, I don't know if you found any redeeming qualities in hers?
Yeah. So she has actually 3 bills: LB 691, LB 694, and LB 695. And I don't know if those are going to committee or not, or where they're at in the process. But I guess we can just start from the top with the LB 1691. And the way I understand it is it treats all cryptocurrencies as cash and would require reporting over $10,000. And I don't really believe that all cryptocurrencies are cash. And Trent, maybe you can jump in on cryptocurrency versus crypto asset. I think there is a real difference between the two.
Yeah, sure. So I agree. In terms of nomenclature, and this is a problem I think in maybe all of these pieces of legislation, is that the definition of what we're talking about really hasn't been concluded, I think, worldwide yet. And so I think that's a big problem. So my definition is I kind of put any blockchain asset, decentralized blockchain asset, as a crypto asset. And within that, I kind of look at them as cryptocurrencies, crypto commodities, or tokens. And all 3 of those have a different purpose. They have different use cases. So it's not semantics, because it's a utility token versus a specific currency are very different, and their utilization is different. The IRS has defined them in general as property. And so, at least from an IRS standpoint, there is kind of a definition, and that will probably change, I would anticipate, at some time. But right now, it's personal property. And so, for tax purposes, that's how you would look at these things. And currencies are not considered personal property. So just by definition, right there, you've got kind of a cross. And,
right.
So that's kind of how I look at them. I'm not saying that is the way to do it, but it makes it for a little bit easier to talk to people about the specific assets that we're talking about.
And besides what the SEC or IRS has found up to this point, though, you would say all 3 of those reside entirely outside of any traditional systems that we have in place already?
I mean, they're digitally native versus being digitized from another process, right? So, I mean, the US dollar is it's a digital currency. Most of it is done on a ledger, on a centralized server somewhere, the calculation of it. But it wasn't born digitally native. So I think so I think the answer to your question is yes. However, they're being ingrained into systems that are already set up, right? There's companies that are taking them. Back to Kyle's point, within that particular bill, today, when you would do a transaction of over $10,000 at the bank, they would fill that form out and have that done for you. This is putting the onus, from what I understand, on an individual. And again, I'm not an expert in having read through these just from a cursory standpoint, so I could be wrong, but that seems to be a pretty rigorous requirement to put on individuals, especially with a currency or an asset that's fluctuating in value, and how you're defining value can be relative at certain points.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I really worry about with LB 691 and LB 695. So LB 695 actually defines what a smart contract is, while not addressing that tokens and smart contracts can be basically one and the same. So it's very dangerous when lawmakers that aren't, they don't know about blockchain or cryptocurrency or things like that, and they're defining what what these terms are and what they mean, and especially in the early days because it moves so quickly. Like I get very apprehensive when they start defining those terms, because we just don't know where that could paint us into a corner or into a box in the future, and we just I personally don't want that.
I mean, right now, if somebody buys a car for $20,000 and they come to you and they're buying your car and they give you $20,000 in cash, right? Like, the individual does not have to report it, as far as I understand it, but they do have to pay taxes on that money that they made for the sale of the car.
Yep.
If you sold the car individually, if you went to a dealership and you paid with cash, you're putting the onus on the dealer when they go take that money to the bank to fill that out. And a lot of times they're going to want you to fill that out as well, because they don't want to deal with it. There's probably a lot of dealerships that don't want to even accept cash because of that particular issue. But at some point, the form's going to be filled out. I'm curious. I don't know the answer to this, but I'm curious what the impetus was here. And I don't know if you guys have any insight there, but if this was from a lobbying group, if it was from a group of senators, and kind of what the goals are. I know that Senator Blood has said I've heard this from someone else, that she was trying to do something to make Nebraska a friendly business environment for startups, entrepreneurs, etc. I'm not sure these do that or not.
I have a hard time believing that. The impetus, from my understanding, is that like somehow, and you may have mentioned this, Kyle. This might have come from you, even, of like she's trying to stop human trafficking, and crypto is used to buy people, and so that's.
So that's when this is bills way back. I heard, and I haven't actually read them, so I'm not confident in that at all. But basically, that's kind of where it started, and they've morphed to what these would be like more positive, right? Compared to that, right? Anytime you're attaching cryptocurrency to illicit activity, I get a little upset about that, because that's not what it. I mean, some of it is used for that, but it's not a huge percentage. And in fact, Coin Center, which is a nonprofit organization, has studies that say it's less than 1% of cryptocurrency is used for illicit drugs and illicit activities. And so it's like, cash is used for those types of activities at a higher percentage than cryptocurrencies.
And there's a report out as well that we can put on the site for about money laundering, that how little that crypto is actually used for money laundering. I don't, whether you believe the stats or not, I'll provide it at least on the site, and you guys, and also the Coin Center link as well, Kyle. I'd like to get that from you. Okay, yeah, great. And even the thing that people don't pay attention to about a lot of these public blockchains, or they just don't know, is that they are perfectly trackable, right? So Coinbase actually has the ability to, if you send cryptocurrency to, addresses that have been flagged as illicit activity, they will actually freeze your account, and they can freeze it by watching where your currency goes from address to address to address. So they can see it through multiple addresses if you're doing Ethereum or Bitcoin or whatever. So it's actually like a perfect tool for regulators to track illicit activity. Can we move to 987?
Do we drop him?
Looks like we lost him.
That's all right. I can jump into 987. So 987 is being proposed by Paul Shoemaker. And it is actually considered the model law for virtual currency put forth by Coin Center, which is that cryptocurrency lobbyist group. And basically what they wanted to do is clearly to define who is regulated and who is not. And then basically define holding or control is the biggest thing they want to define. So if you control keys, private keys of an individual, you would be regulated under this bill. And then it allows everybody else basically to operate without being regulated.
So that happens at the individual level?
Yeah. So if somebody takes control, so if Coinbase, right, if you use Coinbase, they technically have control of your private keys. So they would be regulated, right? But if it's a hardware wallet, or they even get into the fact that your family members can actually use and not be regulated, and there's exemptions in there. But basically, it was trying to narrowly define who needs to be regulated as a money service business. And it defines it as just people that have, basically, they use the term unilateral control of your private keys.
So when you said this is model legislation from a cryptocurrency lobbying group,
yep.
Then is that a positive for?
So it depends on how you want to look at it, right? From my view, if you create virtual currency specific laws, there isn't any ambiguity anymore, or that's what they're basically trying to define, of like who's in and who's out. That's good. But like, given the fast moving, nature of cryptocurrency, what worries me is, New York passed the bit license thing in 2014. And since then there's been private blockchains and ICO stuff that isn't regulated at all. So when you come in and create that legislation, it could hurt us in the future. We just don't know.
When you have go ahead.
And that's kind of where I'm at across these, is reducing specific ambiguity and being in partnership with regulators. My light just went off. Makes a lot of sense and legitimizes a lot of the business around it. But I think you're right. I think there's a really big risk of putting us behind the 8 ball, because we tried to anticipate what we think it was, and we're also doing that where maybe we're not experts to be able to do that. I don't think anyone can predict this future quite yet. So I would prefer to keep it to continue to monitor and find out or see where specific regulations or laws are working, and then kind of copy those, rather than attempting to be a leader. And I'm not sure how many, like that particular law, how where it's been passed.
I don't know where it's been passed. Right now it's being pushed through, obviously, Nebraska and Hawaii. And, it has the backing from Coinbase, Bitfury, Blockchain, Blockstack, the Digital Currency Group, and others, and Coin Center. And basically the reason they want this passed is, so it's part of the Uniform Law Commission that tries to get uniform laws across all of the states, which could be a good thing. But they've also tried to do this with money transmission laws back in like the early 2000s or late 90s. And they passed something similar, and only 10 states actually used that law, and then everybody else created their own laws. So it's a noble goal of trying to create laws that are easy for people that want to operate across all 50 states. It's just, again, we don't know where the space is going to go. And then on a more specific level to Nebraska, like, I would like to make us have the ability to have advantages versus other people. And that would include startup on-ramps. So as a startup, where you could basically be exempt from being regulated up to a certain dollar amount. And then also providing regulatory sandboxes, I guess, where you're kind of free to innovate as, I don't know, maybe a state bank in Nebraska or something like that. Just so we can basically incentivize people to feel free to innovate with blockchain technology and cryptocurrencies up to a certain dollar amount that wouldn't affect consumers at a mass scale.
I'm surprised that the same thing with this particular law, the definition of using currency. I would have guessed that some of those folks you mentioned that support it would have some pretty detailed definitions of how they view different types of tokens. I mean, one of the things that I've seen specifically happening in an unregulated environment is what's happening with initial coin offerings. The folks who are going forward with these are doing a much more diligent job about their know your customer laws, about their jurisdictional responsibilities, and really trying to get ahead, trying to define if they're a security or a utility, and having legal counsel represent that opinion, and then doing what they have to do in terms of if you have to be accredited or not. And I think we'll see the same thing in what the goal of some of these types of laws is, kind of morph out of it. And that's happened just naturally. A year ago, the ICOs were, I mean, anyone can get in and there were no questions asked. That's not really happening today. I see very few, and I analyze quite a few of them. And I see very few that are not addressing it up front, which I think is a really positive development. And that's a much better place to be rather than SEC enforcement or scare tactics from the SEC. And I know that talking to a few folks who are a little closer to what's happening at the SEC, that they're noticing that as well. And some of the briefs that they've come out with were enough to have people get the impetus to at least attempt to be compliant in how the laws are set out. And that just happened naturally. The government enforced that.
Your mic is scraping on your collar, just so you know. So it's kind of
I'm sorry.
Noise. That's right. So that's why I was asking earlier about are these things outside of traditional frameworks? Because I think, if you look at, I can't remember what state it is, New Hampshire, Vermont, or somewhere, like the idea of, should we just say clearly, instead of passing these long bills that try to, get every exception covered, et cetera, which is not going to be successful and happen. And you see like Coinbase and those guys, of course, this is good for them, or, why do the bigger companies want to put this stuff into place? Because then they have a bigger piece of the pie and it's harder for the smaller guys to get in. I mean, that's kind of a little bit conspiratorial, but like that's one way to look at it. But for them, it also streamlines things because now they can work in every state at the same time. But that doesn't help the small company that's only operating in one state.
Yeah, I was reading through the Uniform Law Commission's basically drafting of this bill, and it's all the big name companies in the space. So from my perspective, if LB 987 passes, it's not the end of the world, but I think we need to be cognizant of trying to foster startups and also a safe harbor space, and especially for the industries we care about in Nebraska, right? Like we can still create our own laws that operate with this LB 987 proposal that gives us advantages as startups and agriculture, if we want advantages in finance, and then supply chain and logistics. Like let's try to leverage advantages for ourselves and not just follow what everybody else is doing.
I like Trent's soft hand approach of, let's say, okay, let's pass a law that says cryptocurrency and blockchain is outside of what the traditional money transmitter licensing framework. And that's kind of the stance right now, de facto, from what the government has said on their limited opinions on in Nebraska. But then let's also figure out some way to enforce things imply that there is a threat of bad things happening to you if you mess up, and with the ICOs like you were talking about, and let's go from there. The regulation does probably the biggest beneficiary, I think, if you're talking about the private keys, is that the consumer then has something clearly to go back and sue you based on, or the regulators can come in and really slap you with large fines if you do screw up and expose private keys or something like that. Like, that's the biggest win, I guess, for anybody in this whole thing.
Yeah, the thing that and I'm not a crypto expert by any means, but public and private keys, like, there could be instances where our private keys should be held by somebody else. I don't know what those are, and I don't know if those are moving forward. I personally like to hold mine and not have Coinbase hold them or a central party do it. But there are instances where that could happen in the future. I always worry about what's going to happen in 10 years when we can't even predict where this space is going to be in 1 year. So.
Well, from a
wrap up, guys, both of you, I don't want to make this too long, so we're going to do another one on regulation next week. But if you guys can both give some closing, finish your thoughts, and then we'll go ahead and get this posted for everybody to see.
Yeah, I mean, from a high level, I just want to make sure that we're being very thoughtful about what we're doing, and I think in the space, or the people who are working in the space, or the innovators, or kind of the leading edge, has to be thought leaders, and really present all of the incredibly positive benefits that are going to come from this technology, and not pass laws in fear of something, right? I mean, Bitcoin in itself isn't creating child trafficking, and so that's either it's naive, or it's to serve another political purpose for some reason. Kyle, one thing back to your point is, like, will there be necessity to hold someone else's private keys? Honestly, the public, there's probably going to be a lot of custodian opportunities there, because that level of security is going to go way past a lot of what people are going to want to do. So I actually think there'll be a lot of opportunities for someone to hold keys. But I mean, these particular four bills, I'm hoping more thoughtful, and that it's a communication with the people who are in the space, some of the national folks, but especially people here. And I think we're a little too early. So I'd like to get these just killed in committee, and then have another year to watch and think about it, and make maybe more informed decisions down the road.
And I think the holding private keys seems to me like that's like one line entered in some existing cybersecurity bill or IT bill that relates to holding passwords. And if you expose them, you go to court, or whatever the punishment is. That it doesn't seem like that it requires a whole new bill to say, hey, don't expose your customers' private keys like that.
Yeah, and just from my perspective, I think the best part about these laws is actually it's just going to start a conversation, right? So we're going to be able to show up and talk to these senators at these hearings, and I think that's going to be a good thing ultimately. And with these four bills, I'm definitely against 691, 694, and 695 just because of the way they're written. 987, I'm not 100% against, but I do think that our senators can take a Nebraska view on them and be more educated about them before actually passing them.
All right. Well, thank you guys for your time, and please, everybody, subscribe and share this with your friends. And with that, I guess we'll close, and we'll see you on the next episode. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.